I'm Douglas Comer, President of US ECOMOS, the United States National Committee of the International Council on Monuments and Sites. I welcome you to this webinar. It's one in a series that we hope you will follow. In these, we examine how World Heritage can be used to address problems associated with the uncertain time in which we live. World Heritage Sites are sources of identity, pride, international and intercultural understanding, and economic stimulation in their communities and our nation. US ECOMOS is working hard to bring this to the attention of the public and to decision makers. We encourage you to support US ECOMOS as we advocate for World Heritage and its future in the United States. And a case in point, 8 Frank Lloyd Wright sites were inscribed on the World Heritage List in 2019. The nomination, however, was sent back for revision when first put forward in 2016. I attended the 2016 World Heritage Committee meeting in Bonn, Germany when this occurred, and I came away with a very strong sense that to some extent, this reflected the disappointment of the committee with the United States because we had not paid dues to the World Heritage Committee since 2011. We now owe $8 million, but this is a tiny fraction of the infusion of revenue to the United States economy created by visitation to World Heritage Sites. US ECOMOS will address this important issue as a priority with the new Congress. We will search for ways to find funding to pay past and current dues to the World Heritage Fund. For more and updated information constantly about this, please visit the US ECOMOS website. And with that, I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Peyton Hall, US ECOMOS Board and Trustees member and chair of our Advancement Committee. Peyton, please take it away.
Thank you, Doug. Welcome to the US ECOMOS webinar, live from Chicago, Frank Lloyd Wright's Frederick C. Robie House. I'm Peyton Hall, an historic architect with Historic Resources Group in Pasadena, California, an adjunct professor at the University of Southern California, and I have contributed to restoration at the Hollyhock House, Ennis House, and Freeman House. Over the next hour, you'll hear from experts in the field with extensive knowledge of Frank Lloyd Wright and the Frederick C. Robie House. Kathryn Smith will provide the history of the commission and explain the reasons why the Robie House became the cornerstone of modernism. Gunny Harboe will show us the house live and explain some of the critical processes and details that went into the recently completed work. An opportunity for questions and answers from all of you online will follow the presentations. Please use the Q&A function on your screen to write questions for our panelists. The chat will be disabled during the Q&A segment. You can ask questions at any time throughout these presentations. Please only use the chat function to report technical difficulties to our backup staff. And at this point, I'll introduce our first presenter, Kathryn. Kathryn Smith is an architectural historian, preservation consultant, and lecturer. She's the author of numerous books, including Frank Lloyd Wright, Hollyhock House and Olive Hill, and Wright on Exhibit, Frank Lloyd Wright's Architectural Exhibitions, and a contributor to Frank Lloyd Wright, The Houses, and Frank Lloyd Wright, Prairie Houses. As a consultant, she prepared the historian's reports for planning studies for Frank Lloyd Wright's Hollyhock House and Barnstall Park, Florida Southern College, and Darwin D. Martin's Graycliff. She has been an advisor on Taliesin and Taliesin West. In 2001, she received the Wright Spirit Award in the professional category from the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy. Her next publication is Frank Lloyd Wright's Samuel and Harriet Freeman House, Hollywood, California, to be published by Organic Architecture and Design in December 2020. Kathryn?
Thank you, Peyton. Thank you, Peyton. The topic today is the Robie House, designed and constructed by Frank Lloyd Wright between 1908 and 1910. It is located at the corner of Woodlawn Avenue and 58th Street in Chicago, Illinois. This is the 58th Street elevation. It was restored and is operated by the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust. If Frank Lloyd Wright had never designed another residence after 1909, his place in history would be secure, with the series of prairie houses that he built beginning in 1900 in and around Chicago and in some neighboring Midwest states. Their strong horizontal emphasis ties them to the flat horizon line of the Midwest prairies. This photograph in front of you shows the 58th Street elevation. On the ground floor, you see the billiard room, here the playroom, and above the living room, dining room with the private bedrooms above it. This is the Ward Willits House, Highland Park, Illinois, 1902. This is one of the first prairie houses where we see Wright bring the height of the Victorian house down to hug the ground. He organized the exterior into planes of solid and void, and walls of plaster, as we see here, or masonry, with ribbons of leaded glass windows that he called light screens. This is the plan of the Willits house. And you can see here the living room, which is facing the street. As revolutionary as the exteriors were of the Prairie House, the plan was even more so. He broke up the boxes within boxes of the Victorian house. He put the fireplace at the center, as you see, and had space rotate around it. Rooms now opened on the diagonal. The main rooms now received natural light on three sides. This was the open plan, or what the Europeans later called le plan libre. When the budget allowed, Frank Lloyd Wright was interested in what he called the total work of art. This is the Meyer May House, Grand Rapids, Michigan, 1908-1910. Here we see that Frank Lloyd Wright not only addressed the building, but the furniture, furnishings, fixtures, and the color palette, all designed as a unity. The Robie House begins with Frederick C. Robie, who you see here. This is his marriage photo, 1902. He and his wife, Laura, commissioned the Robie House from Frank Lloyd Wright. Robie was an inventor who went from the manufacture of bicycles to motorcycles to automobiles at the beginning of the 20th century. His wife, Laura, was an exceptional woman for her era. She was a graduate of the University of Chicago, and as such, she had lived in the Chicago community of Hyde Park for 4 years prior to her marriage in 1902. The couple decided to build their own house, choosing Hyde Park as the location in 1908. This is a ground floor plan, and you can see it's a long rectangle. The lot is 60 feet wide and 180 feet long. It's located at the corner of Woodlawn Avenue and 58th Street. The long side faced south, an ideal orientation to bring light and views into the main rooms, which Wright placed on the upper floors. Wright designed the Robie House from the spring, early summer 1908 to spring 1909. And here in the ground floor plan, I'd like to call your attention to the entry. And then the lower floor contains the billiard room and the playroom. And I'd also like to direct your attention to the upper right-hand corner where you see an automobile garage for 3 automobiles with no interior walls. This is a clear span garage. Here we see the main floor plan where Frank Lloyd Wright addressed the major ideas to separate the living floor from the services. This is what is called the kitchen and the servants' rooms on our plan in front of you. These are 2 distinct rectangular volumes. The living floor was moved closer to Woodlawn Avenue, while the service wing was slid towards the alley, which the house backs up to. On this floor plan, you'll see the living room, the dining room, and the freestanding fireplace. Also, the south 47-foot cantilevered balcony off the 2 main rooms. This is the central area of the 58th Street elevation, and I want to call your attention to the materials used in the Robie House. They are a combination of traditional and industrial. They were custom designed Roman brick, limestone trim, roof tile, wood, plaster, copper, and clear and colored glass, which you see in the leaded glass windows. But he also used industrial materials, which is steel, concrete, and magnesite. This is a remarkable construction photograph of the Robie House in May of 1909. And you will see there with the yellow arrow, which I provided, that is pointing to Frank Lloyd Wright. He is here with the workmen beginning the construction, and they are laying brick and stone for his approval. Following in a series of these construction photographs, we are fortunate to be able to see the installation of the steel beams and joists, which support the wide spans on all 3 floors and in the 3-car garage, which I directed your attention to a few minutes ago. The 58th Street 47-foot long cantilevered balcony is supported by steel. And this is the view we're seeing here. This is face 58th Street. Here we're looking west in another of these remarkable construction photographs. We're seeing the steel being lifted into place. And if you follow the arrows, which I provided, you will see a very extensive use of steel. This was extremely remarkable for its era. This is a diagram which was made and has been provided to us from the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust. The ground floor steel diagram. You will see that these are very revealing. The red lines indicate the steel members, and it is my opinion, as an historian of modern architecture, that there was no residence like this one being built anywhere in the world in 1909. This was extremely daring. The second diagram from the trust shows the main floor plan with the steel emphasized in these red lines or illuminated. It is obvious that the Robie House was not a steel and glass house, but it contained within it the ideas of modern architecture. In 1909, Mies van der Rohe was 23 years old, and we will speak of him more later. This is the 58th Street elevation of the Robie House, and it shows it as completed, and the Robie family moved in April 1910. On September the 22nd, 1909, with the superstructure of the Robie House substantially complete, Wright turned over the finishes of the interiors to his longtime collaborator, the interior architect, George Mann Niedecken of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Both Wright and Niedecken had met several times over a period of 4 weeks to work out the details and give approval in early September. Niedecken was also completing 2 other Wright Prairie houses at the same time, the Coonley and the May houses. On September 23rd, Frank Lloyd Wright departed for Berlin, Germany, to supervise the publication of a 2-volume drawings portfolio of all of his past work, and a smaller photo book of the same time period. These are known as the Vossmuth books for the name of the publisher. While in Europe, actually in Italy, in the spring of 1910, when the Robie House was completed, Wright commissioned Henry Furman, the Chicago photographer, to provide photos for inclusion in the German photo book. Furman took 6 professional photos while the Robies were in residence here. This one you see on the screen was chosen by Walter Gropius, the director of the Weimar Bauhaus, to hang in his epic 1923 exhibition, which he titled Exhibition of International Architecture. And this view was republished numerous times in Europe in the 1920s. Here you see the Woodlawn Avenue elevation, and directly ahead is the pedestrian entrance. This photograph shows the entrance hall of the Robie House in 1910. Now we're looking at the living room, which, as you recall, is 1 floor above. The living room looks towards the fireplace. The fireplace is declared as a free-standing room divider. Space moves around it and through it. Between 1918 and 1930, several of these photos were seen by young Dutch, Belgian, German, French, and Russian architects as they were being republished. By 1927, the Russian constructivist architect Mosik Ginsburg wrote an article praising the Robie House, and I quote, "The entirely new plan, simple, open, suffused in air and light, and developed freely in space." This is the Furman photograph taken of the living room looking towards the west, to the west porch. This photograph was published in the Vossmuth photo book in 1910. This is the dining room of the Robie House with a custom designed dining suite of furniture. And you'll see that in the corners of the dining table are lamps directed towards the ceiling. These provide ambient light in the dining room. This was all done as a collaboration, Frank Lloyd Wright, George Mann, Niedecken. This photograph was taken in 1911, and it is an interesting photograph for Frank Lloyd Wright. The Robies were leaving their house, unfortunately, 1 year later in 1911. And I think that Frank Lloyd Wright was not completely satisfied with the 1910 exterior photographs. Now back in the United States, he probably gave Furman specific direction. You will see that this photo has been retouched. As well as a better angle, the neighboring house behind has been airbrushed out, and several trees and a lamp pole have also been removed. And I believe Frank Lloyd Wright dictated these instructions to Furman, because for Wright, this photograph represented the architect's ideal. This became the most popular photo of Robie House up until the 1950s. It was reproduced in Europe and the favorite of the Museum of Modern Art, New York. So I just want to point out that the Robie House was only known in black and white to people who hadn't visited in person. That includes everybody in Europe and most of the United States until the 1950s, when color photography was used in publications. Now we see the building as it has been restored today in this incredible photograph by James Caulfield. The exceptional main floor is revealed here, showing the interiors as restored by the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust and as restoration architect Gunny Harboe will explain in a few minutes. This you will see, of course, is the living room looking towards the dining room. This is another Caulfield photograph of the living room towards the west porch. Every detail is important in this photograph, but the space is the most important one. The steel and glass allow the rooms to expand towards the light. Nothing like this had ever been built before. Wright's analysis and synthesis of architectural space was the first major change since the Italian Renaissance with Brunelleschi in 1415. So you see, almost 500 years. It looks commonplace to us today, but in 1910, it certainly was not. The lesson of the Robie House for the modern movement is seen clearly in Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona Pavilion in Spain, which was built in 1929, demolished in 1930, and reconstructed in 1986. This is an open pavilion of I-beams supported by 8 steel columns. Mies van der Rohe in Barcelona, Spain. Going on into the interior, I will say in conclusion that Mies applied his rigorous tools of pure abstraction to transform glass light screens of the Robie House into floor-to-ceiling panels of transparent sheets of glass. He absorbed Wright's dramatic interpretation of spatial organization, and he took it one step further. The vertical plane of the freestanding Robie fireplace became a freestanding wall of golden onyx, and space flows fluidly around it. Like at the Robie House on the main floor, the freestanding wall defines space. It does not contain it. Mies' building is the most dramatic tribute of the modern movement to the Robie House. But the influence of the Robie House in the first decades of the 20th century was very wide. Indeed, earning it the title, the cornerstone of modernism.
Thank you very much, Kathryn. We'll now turn to Gunny Harboe, who is at the Robie House. T. Gunny Harboe, FAIA, is an historic architect and adjunct professor at the Illinois Institute of Technology, who gained a national reputation for his award-winning work on the Rookery and Reliance buildings. Over the past 30 years, he's worked on many projects by Frank Lloyd Wright and Mies van der Rohe, including Taliesin West, Unity Temple, Crown Hall, 860 to 880 Lakeshore Drive, and Carr Chapel. He is also the current president of ICOMOS, International Scientific Committee on 20th Century Heritage, ISC 20C, a U.S. ICOMOS Fellow, and founding member of Docomomo US. Gunny?
Thank you, Peyton. And thank you, Kathryn, for that great introduction to the house. I'd also like to thank the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust for allowing us to do this today, to take an insider's deep tour of the house. So I like to start outside here and give you a sense of the neighborhood context. You heard Kathryn describe Robie and how he decided to build a house here in Hyde Park. And you should keep in mind that here on Woodlawn, this is what you saw. This is what surrounded the neighborhood. These houses that were built at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. And when Wright made his contribution here, it was quite revolutionary, as was said. And one can only imagine what the neighbors were thinking when they saw this house go up. So now we're walking south on Woodlawn, and you get a glimpse of the house. It's like lurking behind in there. What is that? So let's go down to the corner and take it all in. It really is a phenomenal thing. Of course, there's been some modern interventions over the last few years here. The Booth School is right across the street. But you still get this sense of awe of this amazing presence on this corner, this prominent corner, right near the University of Chicago. And here's that image that Kathryn showed that's so well known from the Wasmuth portfolio. But how do you get into this house? Wright often created a sense of mystery or anticipation, creating what's referred to as the path of discovery. He made you work at it to figure out how to get into and experience this space. So where is the door? Well, there was a hint back here. There's a walkway. Maybe that's it. It's certainly not prominent. It's not like what normal houses, when you see the house across the street with a porch, front door, and so on. This is completely different than that. And so you walk along the path. And he did this in many of his works, as well as both domestic and commercial. Let's take a quick little detour up here to this little terrace. And there's not much of a yard here, so this would have been a place that they could have pulled some chairs out and sat down on a cool evening, enjoy the breeze, and watch people walk by. But they would still have a very good sense of privacy. This is about the height you'd be sitting. That's the theological seminary across the street. It's now the Becker Friedman Institute. So anyway, you get a sense that here it is, dominating a view, but still very private. An amazing way to deal with the site. So we continue, and one of the other things that Wright liked to do was a sense of compression and release, a very physical way of dealing with space and making you aware of it, even if you're not necessarily conscious of it. And you see the beautiful door, which this one here is actually reconstructed because at one time it had this was a fraternity that destroyed it. Anyway, now we're inside the house. And this is the foyer, entrance area. And you can see that there's not a lot of light illuminating in here, but there is a hint of something going on beyond. Again, he's drawing you forward. Stairs, it must be up this way. There's many right turns involved, 90-degree turns. Oh, there's a hint of something more light coming in through this screen. Another thing that he liked to use were these wood screens in addition to the light screens of the art glass windows. Well, here's a path. Now we have to decide which way to go. Is it this way? Or this way? More light this way. Another screen. Ooh, we get a glimpse of something's in there. Let's see what that is. Compression. Again, the ceiling is rather low here, about 7 feet. And then you're in the space. Boom. You've arrived. And you can take the whole room in. It's just really beautiful, very elegant, and it's stretched out, but it really creates a beautiful and well-proportioned room. You saw the photographs with the furniture that was designed by Niedecken. This is a reproduction of the original sofa that was here. The original one is actually in the little room at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And the phenomenal thing about this room is the way that the space travels from one to the other. And as Kathryn pointed out, the fireplace becomes something porous, something that you can actually experience the space and the light moving through. This ingle nook here is an important part of Wright's beliefs and creating a cozy place by the fire. He had fireplaces in all of his buildings. He really felt that the fire was the center of the house. And in this case, the inglenook, the bench, was removed in a past time. And so one of the major elements that we reconstructed during the restoration was the putting this back. I should say that the current restoration that we just finished is the latest phase of a 10-year effort that the trust started a long time ago under the guidance of Karen Sweeney, who was their architect of the trust, and she served as the project manager on this project for us. We had an incredible team that helped us to figure out how to restore these interior finishes back to what they were originally, and that's really what the main effort was here. The previous phases were to put infrastructure in. You can see a sprinkler head there. It's hopefully not too well. The idea was to hide them as best we could. Exit signs, of course, you have to have for the code and so on. So let's move into the dining room. Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to take you out. Here. So one of the things about this room is that it's open, very open to the outside. You get the light being screened through these beautiful glass windows with the art glass, and but you can go out on the terrace here, and again, you could pull out your chair, take a seat, look out over the deck, see what's going on down the street, and yet be totally private. You can see out, but they can't see in. And this was a way to allow the residents of the house to have their privacy and still be able to enjoy all the light that was possible. So now we'll move from that living room space into the dining room. Again, the circulation, another little screen. And here we have the dining room. Again, this has been memorialized in a very famous photograph from the original publication. And this is the dining table that was here. It's been altered a little bit, but anyway, it's the original, mostly the original table, and was brought back. Most of the furniture that was in the house was here when the University of Chicago took over ownership, and much of it was put in the Smart Museum, which is an art museum that they have on campus. And they've very kindly brought back a number of pieces back to the house so that it could help in the interpretation. You see the buffet on the side there built in. That was actually reconstructed in a previous phase, but to the exact requirements of what we knew it was here before. And in here you get a little glimpse of the pantry. And I want to show you a couple other things here. So now we're in the back, going back. Here's the back stair, or not the back stair, the stairs up to the sleeping quarters. We're not going to go up there today, but I do want to show you what's known as the mother-in-law's room. This is a bathroom for her. And then in this space, this was where Robie's mother-in-law lived. And you see here, the furniture in this room is all original. So it really gives a better sense of what the scale was and how the room was used. One thing I wanted to share with you, I guess this is as good a place as any, is the major work we did was to restore all the finishes in here, because when they had done the intervention for the new electrical, plumbing, HVAC, and so on, fire protection, they had to make a lot of interventions in here. And so we came back and we restored the surfaces the way they had been originally. And one of the key things, I don't know how well you see this, but anyway, there's sort of a dappled effect, kind of the way the light would play on it. And hopefully this works. I think you can see that. If you look, you can actually see the individual pieces of sand that are in the plaster, and that's intentional. They would expose the sand, and then they would very gently use a paintbrush to paint those highlights. So you see the tops of the sand grains are actually painted a different color than the base color. And that's what gives this wonderful effect, this visual texture that you see on the walls. And this is a technique that he used on a bunch of different buildings at this time. It's different color in here, but it's the same treatment. And it's a very coarse texture. Sometimes they use a little smoother texture, but anyway, that's to give you this depth and the sense of depth of what the space is like, or to add to that space. You see again the modeling effect, the way light, sort of a dappled light effect. I wanted to come back down here because there's a couple things that I think might be of interest. I mentioned this replica of the original door, but the big move down here was to replicate the magnesite flooring, which had disappeared. The original magnesite had asbestos in it, and as many architects know, that becomes a problematic issue, especially in a public building. So in the previous renovation, they had removed and they also had some issues with the floor itself. So they removed all the original magnesite with the exception of the stair. This is the original, this pinkish red color material is the original magnesite, which is in very good condition. Of course, it's been covered with the runner most of its existence. And then what we did was to replicate that using almost the exact same formula minus the asbestos. And one of the things that's interesting about this material is that it has a lot of wood fiber in it, little sawdust basically, that's actually part of the mix and allows the floor to have a feeling of some resilience. So this is the billiard room, and there never was a billiard table as far as we know, but it was billed as the billiard room. So this was to be the realm of Mr. Robie, no doubt. You see down here on the first level, on the lower level, there's no color in the glass, in the windows. It's just the lead caming. Copper, actually, it's copper-coated zinc caming is what it is. This is the doors that went out to a protective zone where the children could play. It originally did have grass, and we're working on how to bring that back. But nonetheless, this was sort of a protected area where you didn't have to worry about the children being kidnapped. And here we go into the children's playroom. Again, compression. This ceiling is very low here, kid scale, you could say. This too was restored. It also has its own little fireplace, and you can see how the scale of that is quite small. One of the interesting things in this space is that this ingle nook, this bench here, in behind the wood elements, was original plaster finishes. Because the building had undergone so many renovations in its life, there were very few places where we could actually find the original paint treatments. But in behind this woodwork and even the wood trim that surrounds the area above the fireplace, we actually found original surfaces that could be then looked at very closely. And of course, we did everything with using laboratory forensics. Building Conservation Associates was our consultant. They did a fantastic job, as they always do for us, in determining what really went on here. And then Evergreen Decorative Arts, they were the painters on the job, and they're fantastic. They were really able to replicate the whole method that was used to create this original finish in the way that it was. And here I wanted to also point out the beams, as Kathryn was talking about, the structural steel in here. So there's larger beams in this area here running this way, and then you have these smaller joists that run across here. But inside that plaster is the original steel. And most of this plaster, in the whole house, most of the plaster is original. We did have to replace these ceilings because there's new mechanical work and so on that went on up there. But in most of the spaces, it's all there. So one last thing. I have to run up. Sorry, I should have done this upstairs and then I'll be done. I wanted to show you one other thing that I think is really remarkable, and that is this is the only light fixture that remained. there were ones at all the places you see them in here. These are all reproductions, but this one is an original one. And you can see the way that he uses light again, even in the light fixtures. He has a perforated top, and then when it's illuminated, it casts a shadow on the wall. Again, playing with light. That's the way these overhead screens are also part of that whole thing. It's all one united sense of how to decorate the space. So I'll leave it there, I think, and we'll go to questions.
Thank you, Gunny. At this time, we are receiving your questions via the Q&A function on your screen. You may write questions now, and we will have also received any questions that you submitted earlier. So I will be directing the questions to Kathryn or Gunny, and they will have the opportunity to supplement each other. So starting with Kathryn, when was the Robie House completed? How many owners have there been? And when was it opened to the public?
Well, the ownership of the property differs between families and institutions. So there were only 3 families that lived in the Robie House. The Robies unfortunately left in about April 1911. Robie's father had died, and he was his business partner. So this threw Fred Robie into a great deal of economic panic. This led to actually the breakup of his marriage. So the house changed hands in December of 1911 and went to the Taylor family, who purchased it for $50,000. Unfortunately, tragedy struck again. Mr. Taylor died. They sold it to the Wilbur family in November 1912, and they were the family to live there the longest. In 1926, they put it up for sale, and as Gunny Harboe pointed out, across the street on Woodlawn was the Chicago Theological Seminary. They were thinking ahead to the future and to build additional structures as their programs advanced. So in 1926, they bought the Robie House for $90,000 to demolish it. They had no interest in the Robie House really as a work of art or architecture. They just wanted the land value. The seminary continued to own it until 1941, when they decided to move ahead on demolition. This news reached the community and Frank Lloyd Wright, and there was a great deal of protest. The seminary dropped those plans until 1957, when they again hired an architect, did testing, and they intended to demolish the Robie House. This was the biggest protest. It went on for 2 years. It was an extremely complicated matter, and it ended in 1957 with a man named William Zeckendorf, who was from the East Coast. He was a developer doing work in the Hyde Park area, and it was a stalemate. So Zeckendorf chose to purchase the Robie House for $125,000. And he was in communication with Frank Lloyd Wright, who had also wanted to purchase the Robie House. Very unusual for Wright's career. He had 2 major buildings go into demolition, and he never stepped forward. But in this case, he wanted to own the Robie House. And so in December of 1958, Zeckendorf told him he was giving the Robie House to Frank Lloyd Wright as a Christmas present. And Frank Lloyd Wright was thrilled. Unfortunately, the legal proceedings went on until the spring of 1959, and Frank Lloyd Wright died. But Zeckendorf's wish was that the building be preserved and restored, and he donated it to the University of Chicago in 1962. That's been owned by the University of Chicago since that point to today. And the next major milestone was in February 1997. The Frank Lloyd Wright Trust took over the restoration and management of the Robie House. But I just want to add, because I looked this up for our program, that when Zeckendorf gave the Robie House to Frank Lloyd Wright, he wrote him a letter. And in this letter, Zeckendorf said, "The value of financial investments may depreciate, but in the future, the worth of the Robie House will be many times the cost of its restoration." So I think with this program, the audience certainly agrees with him.
Thank you, Kathryn. One more for you with, and Gunny can certainly contribute. Did Frank Lloyd Wright actually have a hand in every aspect of this total expression of architecture, art, fixtures, and furnishings?
Well, yes, he did. But the interiors, as Gunny has gone into great detail, was a collaboration with George Mann Niedecken, who he had been working with since 1902. So he had a long history with Niedecken, and they were very, very close collaborators. But yes, even though Frank Lloyd Wright was in Europe for September 1909 and through the Robies moving in, he made all the preparation ahead of time. He went to Europe because he knew he was going in the spring of 1909. So he actually planned the construction in a way that the superstructure was finished. He turned it over to Niedecken, and he made all these preparations before he left. So he made sure it fulfilled his original intentions.
Thank you. And the big money questions. What did it cost to build this house? And who funded all of the restoration work that that Gunny had his hands on?
Well, I'll just chime in on my part, and then Gunny will continue. I looked this up as well. The original lot cost $13,500. The construction cost with the contractor was $26,000, and Niedecken had $7,000, which he billed. But then over the time the Robies lived there, there's another $2,000 to $3,000 that they continued to add furniture. So Frank Lloyd Wright's architect fee would come to about $5,000, which the total then adds up to just a little over $51,000, which is a lot, obviously, in 1910 for a private residence. But my friend Eric O'Malley in Chicago made this comment about that. He said, "It's very expensive for a house in 1910, but it's very cheap for immortality."
And Gunny, what about all this? Where did all the motivation and money come from? All the good work that's been done there in the past 10
Well,
years.
the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust was the the one that was responsible to raise the money and to oversee the restoration, and of course it was a lot of money that they needed to raise. In total, I think the number is around 10 million that they spent over a decade. The first phase, or the most intensive phase, was doing exterior restoration, and then the interior upgrades for bringing the mechanical systems and new electrical and all that, and life safety issues, fire protection. So that was extremely expensive. And in fact, they needed more money. So there was a hiatus of several years while they were raising more money to finish this interior phase, finish restoration, which is what we were leading for them. And I think that was around, that portion of it was around 3 million. I can't remember the exact numbers. I want to make one quick note about the Niedecken thing. I think people talk about, well, did Wright really do it? And it's like with many architects, I think the influence of Wright on whatever Niedecken was doing was very strong. And if you look, others have studied Niedecken's work. He was an interior architect and did a lot of other work, not just with Wright. So if you can compare what Niedecken was doing on his own design work versus what he did for Wright, I think you get the answer.
Yeah, totally agree. Absolutely.
Kathryn, you've pointed to this house as a cornerstone of modernism and showed us an image of the Barcelona pavilion. What were the personal and professional relationships among Wright, Mies van der Rohe and Walter Gropius, whose name also came up?
Well, throughout Frank Lloyd Wright's lifetime after the Robie House, he had a great deal of difficulties, both with his personal life and his financial life. And he was hanging on to his view that he was the leader of modern architecture in the world. And when the next generation, Mies, the Bauhaus, Walter Gropius became, Le Corbusier became so prominent, he felt that he'd lost his title. So he, in some ways, was very open to these professionals, other architects, especially Mies van der Rohe, who came to the US in 1937. And he took Mies through the Robie House at that time. Gropius, he had a much more difficult relationship with. Gropius, when he came, wanted to visit Frank Lloyd Wright at Taliesin, and Frank Lloyd Wright refused that visit. He felt very shut out by Gropius and not really respected, but that took a while. They rebuilt their relationship in 1940 and then met several times after that. So it was kind of a mixed situation.
I'll just jump in. There are a lot of stories about the relationship between Frank Lloyd Wright and Mies, particularly after Mies arrived in Chicago in '38. But there is a story as well that when Mies was a young aspiring architect and working for Peter Behrens in Germany, and Gropius was in that office as well, that there was a time when the Wasmuth was published, and Behrens bought a copy and brought it to the office. And the story is that everybody put down their drafting equipment and stopped and went through the document because they knew this was something that needed to be investigated. And there's no question that Mies was impacted by that and was very much looking forward to meeting Wright when he came. He got the invite to go to Taliesin. He was supposed to show up for an afternoon and spent 3 days there, to the point where I believe it was Ogilvana Wright commented that poor Mr. Van der Rohe, had a soiled shirt by the time he left or something like that. Didn't have a chance to do his laundry. So, and he showed him Johnson Wax at that time, which was under construction. I think there was quite a high level of mutual respect between both architects, even though there was also certainly a competitive feeling as well. When starchitects collide, there's always some, and they both certainly had an ego, although Wright's was much bigger. I would say Wright had a much bigger ego than Mies in that regard.
For either of you, was Frank Lloyd Wright inspired by Wooded Island at the 1893 Columbian Exposition for the Robie House? From my standpoint, a very arcane and interesting question.
In actuality, there have been numerous articles written about this topic, and it's included in several books. And the general speculation is that, yes, Frank Lloyd Wright did see this Japanese structure there in Chicago in 1893, so the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893, and that he was influenced, and you can trace it into some of the early buildings he did in around 1900, the Hickox and the other house, the Bradley House in Kankakee. But maybe Gunny has a view of this topic.
Well, the stories are that he was very much taken by it. And in fact, he went to Japan to really explore it on his own. And it was 06, 05, 06, I think.
1905.
Right? So
Spring
05,
1905.
And going to Japan in those days from Chicago, that was a big deal. And he went, I don't know, for several months, I believe.
3 months.
Took a lot of photographs, took a lot of copious notes. And there's no question that his experience there with Japanese architecture influenced what he was doing. But of course, his genius is that he took those things and transformed them into something his own. He didn't like to talk about his influences so much because it was like felt he was giving it away, shall we say? But I don't think that's a fair assessment, because he took those cues. He learned a lot. I mean, his ability to understand sense space, created in his head prior to putting pen to paper or pencil to paper, I guess in his case, was a really remarkable thing. And that's because he had a full understanding of what it was to make architecture and how you create space out of the pieces that you put together that make the actual building.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I did notice about this question of the 1905 trip to Japan for 3 months is that its date is interesting, because when he returns to the United States, if you look at the houses that he took up and were completed, his focus on the concept of total work of art, the building as a total work of art, as you know, you see there, Gunny, right in the middle of it, that increased after the 1905. We have the Coonley House, the Meyer May House, the Robie House. It increased. So I think that spending time in the Japanese spaces that he visited and also must have stayed in, I think that had an influence on him about really wanting to bring the unity of the building with the fixtures and the furniture and the finishes. I see that increase after 1905.
I have, in wrapping up, 3 sort of bricks and mortar questions for Gunny. Was encaustic paint applied to the plaster on the interior?
That's all oil-based paint, both the base coat and the highlights, the flash, as the painters call them, and that exists in different ways in different places. I don't know how well you could see it. I mean, I showed you with the one example on this lower portion here. Let's see, 1 second. On this part here, but up here, this is just one layer of paint. You can see there's 2 colors. It's sort of a 2-toned effect. There's sort of a light pink, the lower part, and then the other is a yellowish color. And I have to say, what was weird was, or not weird, but remarkable, was when we were doing the work and all the trim was out. We had every piece of trim in this building was removed, taken off site, restored, numbered, brought back, put in. We didn't go through all that. But anyway, when it was just the raw plaster, and most of this is the original plaster. There's a little touch up, but basically it's all the original plaster. It looked very strange. I was like, really? Is that what it's gonna? That's kind of a weird color. And then when the trim went in, boom! It all just sort of pulled together. It's amazing how he understood what it would take to make a complete work of art.
Well, I regret that we have to close because we want to keep to our schedule. We owe, as Gunny mentioned, a special thank you to our host, the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust. The Trust operates the Robie House and is responsible for the fundraising for sustaining it and the restoration work that is under Gunny's hand. Go to flwright.org/visit/Robie House, which will be on the closing slide, to buy your tickets for a visit. Even if you've been here in the past, it's time to come back. Thank you again, Kathryn and Gunny, for your time and knowledge. We couldn't have found a better site historian or architect to illuminate the important aspects of an element of the United States' newest UNESCO World Heritage Site. And with that, I'll return you to Doug Comer.
Am I on? Yes. All right. I just want to say that I found that absolutely fascinating to listen to, I suppose, not so much the influences, but the context in which Wright worked and how he managed to create something very new from all of that. So I want to thank the presenters, Kathryn Smith and Gunny Harboe, the moderator, Peyton Hall, who did an outstanding job. And I also want to thank essential people behind the scenes, Kate Perry, Zoe Long, Nicole Urson, and Livy Likens. We encourage you to provide as much support as possible to the Frank Lloyd Wright sites. Visit them virtually and in person whenever the opportunity arises. And please do seriously consider becoming a member of US ECOMOS so that we can continue and accelerate our work. I'll mention that donations this year are especially important as we retool for the new world we live in, and we have an unprecedented opportunity. All donations made until the end of 2020 will be doubled through a match grant that has been so generously provided by US ECOMOS fellow Ronald F. Fleming. We'd like to stay in touch with all of you, and we'll keep you informed about upcoming webinars, as well as our November 12 and 13 International Conference and Symposium. The theme this year will be social justice. On December 19, we will hold a virtual celebration of World Heritage with comments from well-known advocates for World Heritage and greetings from many World Heritage sites. We will prepare traveling chests of festive foods and items that will be sent to those who register for the celebration. So we will meet again. Until then, stay safe and happy, and thank you again for attending. Good day.